Welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. I have Chief Harvey from Golden PD in Colorado, 38 years total in law enforcement. Really looking forward to this conversation. We're talking about leadership, wellness. He's really passionate about both. So, welcome to the show, Chief Harvey. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Paige. Looking forward to this.
Of course, I am too. I would love if we could start with a little bit of background. 38 years is a long time to be in this profession. You said you started as a dispatcher, correct?
Yeah, I started as a dispatcher in 1987. I did that for about 2.5 years. Then I got promoted to dispatch supervisor. So I supervised the unit for a year. We also did records back in those days. There wasn't a separate records division in dispatch. So we did all of those things. So I feel a kinship to our non-sworn team members. In law enforcement, many times there's this, if you're not sworn, you're not born kind of mentality. And
Yeah.
I think that one thing I've been able to garner over the years is respect because I did start as a non-sworn person. And so I understand kind of their mission, their role, and how at times you may not feel as valued. And so for me, it's one of the things I focus on is trying to make sure they understand that they're just as important as any other member of our team.
Yeah, I really like that. And I always say this, I really believe that our perspective is based on our past experiences and our preconditioning. And so because you came from that space, you now have the ability to see how important they are for the team and for the overall mission and have that empathy and sense of understanding because you had that experience.
I totally agree. And I also think it gives I think it allows other people in the organization, and particularly the sworn folks, when I start talking about the value, the role of that we cannot do what we do without them, uh, it it means something to them because I'm coming from a place of reality. For
Mm.
example, my executive assistant, I call her the XO of the ship. She's the executive officer. And when I became chief, I immediately brought her in as part of the executive staff. So she attends all of our meetings and she has as much value in those meetings as my commanders, as my deputy chief, because she also speaks on behalf of the larger whole.
Yeah.
And I just think that that's important. I want to build a team that everybody feels safe, but also feels like they're adding something to the overall success, to our outcomes that we're trying to get to each and every day.
I really like that. I've actually never ever heard of anyone doing that. I think at the end of the day, on a human level, we all want to feel like we have value in the things that we do and that we're adding value to the world. And when you can show that in action of like, hey, I'm not just going to say that I value you, like I'm going to show you that everyone in this team is a valuable key component to what we do, then everyone will follow, because now there's a deeper purpose for the mission.
Yep, totally agree.
When you look back on your career, what has changed between now and 38 years ago?
Well, when I look at dispatching, it's funny that the only computer we had was the old green screen DOS computer. There was no regular computers in there. There was no CAD systems. We did all of our calls on cards. Um, and the evolution of technology obviously has exploded.
Yeah.
As a police officer, when I started, I carried a revolver. The police officers weren't carrying semi-automatic guns. There were no rifles. You had a shotgun and a revolver in the car, and then there were no cell phones. They started coming in shortly after I started on the road, but we didn't have computers in the car. We had a radio. We had the controls for the lights and the PA. And they would used to say, they'd give us the code. You have to come in and call dispatch. We used to have to stop off at a convenience store to call dispatch if they needed to speak to us. So I think technology is huge, right? I mean, it really has changed the kind of equipment. Like we're now outfitting all of our cars with, well, not all of them, but a number of them with grapplers, right? Because we look at the way we did pursuits back in those days. I was in pursuits that 130 miles an hour that really ended in death and mayhem. And sometimes I sit back and I'm like, man, how did we survive those younger years. Like my partner's got 34 years. I'm 35 years as a cop, and we like to talk about the way things were in those days, and it was very, very different, just the way we responded. Um, and and so really technology has been the biggest change. And then of course the law always grows and evolves. And so that ends up changing many, many times the way in which we used to do work, right? And so, like in Colorado, we had the Metro Pursuit policy, and then everybody went to that. Where before it was, you know, pretty much did what you needed to do in order to arrest bad guys. And now we look at things through a very different perspective. The other thing is I think just the advent of generations. There's far more college educated and highly trained people. We place far more emphasis on training our members than we did in the past. My first 3 years, you went through your 1 week of standard in-service training where you would do some driving and arrest control and some firearms training, and that was it. You didn't go to very often into a class on search and seizure or something like that. And post, for the most part, has changed the rules so much that um, I always go back to one comment. The Colorado Peace Officers Handbook, which is a book that's used in a lot of criminal justice classes to teach law enforcement officers how to apply the law, how to apply search and seizure, how to apply taking people into custody, vehicle operations, right? That these um, all of that goes on with it. The first sentence in there, it says, that many times cops will say, geez, you have to be a lawyer to be a police officer these days. And the answer is no, you actually have to be better than an attorney because they get the 2020 hindsight. They get to go back and armchair quarterback your case. You have to know the law better than they do. And that was very different than when I first started. You just apply the law as best as you can, and now you really do have to have a complete understanding of not only how the law works, but then how am I going to apply that in real life circumstances?
Yeah.
Not to mention then the fact that in many of those instances, we're talking about non-program decision making, right? Where things are rapidly evolving and you're making a decision in real time based on the real things you're seeing, you're sensing, you're smelling, you're feeling. And it is that training and experience that really helps. And so I think that has really helped evolve law enforcement into what we now consider a profession. When I first started, it was a job, and now it's a profession.
Yeah. It sounds like there have been a lot of things that have helped to, in some ways, make the job easier, the profession easier in the terms of technology and, some of the things that you guys have accessible that maybe you didn't back then. But do you think that this profession is harder today than it was when you started?
It's a good question. I think in some ways, yes, and then
Yeah.
in some ways, no. Um, I believe, now I'm an eternal optimist, right? So for me, the cup isn't half empty or half full, it's overflowing. I really truly try to look through the world through optimistic eyes. And so I have a firm belief in the essence of humankind. And I do believe that the vast majority of people get in the field of law enforcement because they really do want to help people. And I think, like many other professions, you'll end up getting a bad apple from time to time that unfortunately paint the rest of us with a broad paintbrush, right? And so, from that regard, I think that people have gotten into the field for the absolute right reasons. Now, the hard part is that unfortunately the media has also grown in technology. I say unfortunately, that's probably not the best choice of words, but they have grown. The access we have, everybody's got cameras now. If you're making a contact, somebody's likely going to be recording, or it's going to be on a ring camera, on somebody's house camera. And so, therefore, anything and everything that we do can immediately be made very public,
Yeah.
and not just through the news media, but all the other platforms that are out there, Instagram or Facebook, and all of these things, and then people can use what they've got to express their narrative in the manner in which they want that story to be told. because ultimately at the end of the day, and I've been dealing with the media for at least 20 years of my career, is that they have a story to tell. And so, you have to build those relationships to get that story told, I think, in the framework and in the manner in which you want it told. But
Yeah.
these other freelance can allow that to be spun a different way, which is why I try to be very transparent because I want to have some input on how it's going to be told.
Yeah.
And so I think that today police officers are under far more scrutiny because of that one piece of technology. And as a result, it in many times I've seen over time that law enforcement have built some barriers, perceived or otherwise, right? I mean, sometimes it can be our own barriers that we're putting up. Sometimes it can be out of hurt, you know. For example, we can go back to 2019, 2020, when the biggest change in law enforcement occurred during, my almost 4 decades now was, George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many other incidents that became so public, and the immediate influx into the media, and then how that story was being told, and then each person becomes a force multiplier. So when they're out there and they hear it, they're sharing their thoughts and their ideas and how they feel, and many times very passionately
Mm.
to other people. And then what happened in law enforcement? Black Lives Matter came in, and they had a very strong um, public persona of what message they wanted to be sent out to society. And I'm not saying it's right, wrong, or indifferent because I find value in the ability to sit down and to communicate, to work through, to talk, to have different perspectives. That's what makes really the world go round. And I'm a firm believer in our um, First Amendment right to free speech. And but what that did do is then that spun into to fund the police and police reform. And what I saw from the law enforcement side was a lot of people building up these barriers, and they're like, well, if they don't want us to help them, then good luck. Who's going to come, right?
Yeah.
What I saw was I always try to take a seat back, and I always try to check myself at the door. And so oftentimes I'll go home and I'll ask myself, did I handle this right, or did I perceive that right? Um, because I think that's where the real lesson is in self-reflection.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started looking at it and I'm like, why am I feeling this way? And it helped me open my eyes up to look at all of the media from a different lens. And as we're talking about leadership, one of the things that I always say is that it is incumbent upon every leader to change their viewpoint. And so if you are operating out of a ranch house with only windows on the front, you're only going to see what you see in the front, rather than changing to one of the other two sides or the back door. And that you should want to operate on a skyscraper, and you
Mm.
should want to look out every window on every floor from different varying perspectives so that by the time you get to the top, you have a more complete understanding of what it is that you're really seeing, and then you can make a better decision.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I did was I sat back and I said, I'm going to start listening to every news outlet possible, and I'm just going to listen. God gave us two ears and one mouth for a reason. I'm going to use the two ears and I'm going to listen to what the message is. And what I heard was not necessarily defund the police or police reform. I heard I don't trust the police. There was a breakdown in public trust and confidence. And the more I watched, the more I learned. And so now I think that pendulum has swung a little bit. So I think that we went through those hard times. We had a mass exodus of so many highly skilled, highly trained, tenured police officers that left the field in droves all over the United States. And Golden was no different. And now that pendulum has swung back again, where that trust, that confidence in the police has started to come up again. And now people are starting to look at law enforcement as a real career. But for a long time, we were struggling because nobody wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And I remember times that I was embarrassed about admitting that I was a police officer. So I think that really is probably one of the hardest things, is that it was just very different when I was a police officer, even though I looked like a fresh baby at the time. People respected the uniform, they respected the position you were in for the most part. and they were going to do what you were told. And now it's just a very different ball game. So we have to train differently. We have to prepare them differently. The onus is on us as leaders to provide them the tools to be able to do this job, not just great, but to be better than great.
Yeah. Wow. There are a few things that you said that I want to kind of revisit. I love this idea of how can you take a step back for a moment and how can you broaden your perspective so that you can make effective decisions and you can get the full picture. And I think that so often we have like blinders, we have our one track mind of how we tend to operate. I relate this a lot. So I think you can apply this to a lot of different situations, but I used to be a professional skydiver. And when we would train skydiving, we always knew like who was like the newbie because they only could see what was in front of them, right? There was like this tunnel vision that would happen. And the more experienced you were, the more you were able to see your peripherals, right? You could see everything around you. And so the more you could see, that meant the more experience and the more training you had to be able to see. And so I really, really like this idea of how can we have more self-awareness, self-assessment? How can we zoom out? How can we listen to other perspectives and understand that other perspectives are valuable? And sometimes we don't always know what we don't know. For us to say that we know all the things, and who's been in that situation before where someone gives you a different perspective and you're like, whoa, I didn't even think of it that way. And that's so good. And so I like that you said that you value that communication and different perspectives. The other thing, and this kind of changed my perspective a lot as like an outsider kind of looking in, when you talk about everything being on camera. I was at a conference, I was at a first responder conference, and they showed like a media clip of a body cam of what had happened, right? And from that short clip, you kind of were drawing these conclusions, right? Because it was like this really short, like 10-second thing from one perspective, right? Then they showed the full picture and another body cam, another perspective. And it was a completely different thing, right? And you were like, whoa, like I could not believe it to see how vastly different, the 10-second to the full picture really was. And I always try to tell people, because I'm a huge empath. I have empathy, like probably to a fault. And I try to like tell people, what if your life was constantly being recorded, and they took a small clip from an argument you had with your spouse or you driving in traffic or whatever it is, and then they spun it that way versus seeing the big picture? How would you feel? That would be a really difficult situation to be in. And so I have a lot of empathy for you guys walking through your day-to-day life with everything being recorded and some of those very, very small, like one-sided perspectives being the ones that are out on display.
Well, I go back to, um, well, first of all, let me start by saying this. I'm a pracademic. And what I mean by a pracademic is that I'm a practitioner.
Mm,
It means I practice enforcing the law, but I have an academic background. So I have a master's degree. I've been to the FBI National Academy. I've been through Northwestern Center of Police Staff and Command. I've gone to the Senior Management Institute for Police. I have an employment law certification, and I have, uh, you know, probably 2,000 hours, maybe even more of training in so many different areas. That academic background allows me to make better decisions. But that also means that I believe in being a lifelong learner, which I'm sure you have heard from many chiefs that lifelong learning is critically important.
mhm,
And so, what you're saying there, go back to a book written by Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And that is seek first to understand, then to be understood.
mm,
What we don't do is we make assumptions. And you're talking about just that. We make assumptions based on what we see. But that's fine. It's the iceberg effect, right? We're only going to make we're going to make a lot of our opinions, our thoughts, our decisions making are going to be off of what we see, not what we know. And so in this particular case, I look back on it and say, you know what? I always try to remind myself, hold on a second before you respond, because I'm an emotional reactor. I lead from my heart. I'm very protective, like you. I'm very empathetic and compassionate. My executive staff says I'm too kind. I didn't know there was such a thing as being too kind, but and so as a result, you know, I can maybe become softer in my approach on things than maybe they would prefer me to be. But I always say, I want to take that step back and then seek to understand.
Yeah.
I want to know where they were coming from, what they were feeling, what they were sensing, because we don't always do a best job of unearthing that stuff. And I will get to that because that helps me make a humanistic decision, right? A
Yeah.
value-based decision. And so when we talk about what we were just going through, really try to understand where somebody's coming from, right? You don't know what you don't know until you know what it is that you didn't know.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is if we all started with, I didn't know that, and go backwards and say, how do I learn? How do I get the most information to make that decision? Then the better off we would all be. And I don't want to rush. I mean, hey, you don't get through 38-year career law enforcement and not make a lot of mistakes. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I've had time now to implement changes in my leadership style and who I am as a human being. To always look internally and try to get better. And I think by doing that, it is important to try to understand the plight of the other person, but really get down to what it is that we're dealing with. And when you do that, then I think you can make a better decision that helps everybody. Because at the end of the day, every decision we make has an impact on somebody.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to what you said before about being a lifelong learner and having a growth mindset. It's okay to stumble. It's okay to make mistakes. As long as you have that ability to ask yourself, how can I not make that same mistake again? How can I be better? How can I learn from it? How can I grow from it? And you have to have that ability to take that step back and ask those questions. I used to call this the power of the pause. And then people told me to call it a tactical pause. And, you put tactical in front of anything and everything is cool, but I used to call it that because um, I used to be really emotionally reactive, not in a good way. So we talk about making mistakes and, learning and growing. Like I was definitely the person who was very emotionally reactive. If someone was at all confrontational, I was like really sharp-tongued and it was never the best. And I always had to apologize and dig myself out of a hole. And I learned more of the nervous system regulation, emotional regulation to be able to take that moment to step back for a second and like really try to decide how do I want to respond to the situation and having more control over that response. And what I realize is we all have the ability to choose how we respond to something. And I think a lot of times we don't give ourselves enough credit for how much control and power we really do have. And so I think it's trained practice. It's not something that comes automatically or naturally. And obviously, you guys have to make decisions that are really quick, split-second decisions. But when it comes to having a conversation with someone, or, if you have that ability to take that step back, pause, choose how you want to respond. Again, it might not be perfect, but, if it's not perfect, then later having the ability to reassess. I wanted to ask you, as a leader, I know you've been through, you said almost 4 decades of this career. How can leaders evolve and adapt to the times, to this generation, to things that are happening now? I have these conversations a lot about, that the old adage of you kind of get stuck in your own ways and like things are the way that they are, and that's just how they are, and that's how they've always been. What advice or what practices have you used to be able to evolve and adapt over the years?
Well, I think the first thing is to understand that it's not the same. I mean, you got to acknowledge the fact that it has changed.
Mm.
And with that change has come different people, right? I have four different generations of folks that work in my organization. And the baby boomers look at it very different than my generation, Gen X, although I'm on the cusp of being a boomer versus an Xer. And then Gen Y and now, Zennials. And my boys are going to be, they're part of the alpha generation. And so, I've always said that it's my job to adjust, not their job to adjust. And I think that's the first thing that a leader's got to understand is the more you stay the same, the more you decay.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to stay the same. This profession has not stayed the same. And if the profession has changed, why shouldn't we? See, my motto is I work for them. They don't work for me. My job is to work for them. That is an awesome responsibility. And so what I always try to do is to ask myself, what are, so first of all, I don't like painting anybody, any group of people with a paintbrush. I try to look at everybody as individuals. They all bring strengths and weaknesses and indifferences, and it's that melting pot that makes the organization fabulous and grow and come to life, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it is the good stuff. And so when I think about that, I always ask myself, what am I doing to make this career the best for them? Because they do look at the world very differently. And as we move on into some wellness discussion stuff, that they I was trained by baby boomers. I grew up living a life of work, 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 work.
Mm,
It was very difficult to change. I'm still working hard to change. Zennials work to live, not live to work. I lived to work. And that's it's not healthy. And fortunately we're looking at that now and recognizing that. But really it is incumbent upon the leader to go back and find out what works good in these types of generations. Like, for example, do you think that if you were trying to recruit people to your organization and they asked if you have computers in the car and you said, computers, we don't have computers in our car. Do you think they're going to come work for you or they're going to go work for your competitor? They're going
right.
to go work for the competitor, right? And so it is if we're gonna look at the reality of things, the reality is for us to adapt and to overcome and to sit down and have conversations. I believe, I have an open door policy. People come in and talk to me all the time to the point where they share lots of their most intimate secrets and stuff with me because I've established a trust relationship with them. Um, and that is to sit down and find out what is it they're really seeking from their career and from their life, and then just apply those things. In Colorado, when I first started, you didn't have tattoos. Everybody's got tattoos now, sleeves. It's normal. We weren't allowed to have beards or mustaches. We could have a mustache, but no beards or goatees. That's all changed. People now wear shorts, and we've grown to allow certain religious items to be worn when people are in uniform, and men are wearing earrings. All of the stuff that would have never happened in my day, um, now are normal, and I'm the one approving them because I look at that and say, I'm going to do. How does it really impact society? Society looks like them,
Yeah.
right? Whoever them are, somebody's going to look like that and they're going to want that. And so I want to open the door to get the most talented people in by making sure I'm at the top of finding all the things and giving them good work-life balance and a mission statement they believe in and all of the tools to be able to do the job and the financial support, the emotional support, the wellness support. I don't want them to ever want to leave this organization because they feel loved. They
Yeah.
feel cared for, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you can start knocking those first three layers off, you're going to have them. And I always say, because we're in golden, I want to get my golden hooks in them because if once I do that, then they're never going to leave.
I love that. One of the things that kind of popped into my head as you were talking is the question of how we can change the narrative on change. Because I think that when you're saying, like, I'm always trying to change and like adapt and grow, like, it's positive. And you said this like in my motto, and it's a little bit more dark maybe than what you said, but I think it's very similar. My motto has always been, if you're not growing, you're dying. If you're not
Yep.
trying to grow, there's that stagnation, right? And I think so often that word change scares people.
Oh
It's
yeah.
it's viewed as a negative, where people are like, "Oh, I don't want to change. Like I want everything." It's like comfort zone fear of change that keeps you in that space of stagnation. And so, how can we change the narrative around that word change so that people understand that it's a positive, it's good to change. I don't want to 10 years down the road be in the same place I am today. I hope I'm better. I'm going to put in place the steps every day to ensure that I am better. Change is a good thing. I think that we need to have more conversations that change the perspective on what that looks like.
Yeah, I used to teach organizational change. So I served as a college professor as well for a number of years. And there's a great little book out there called "Who Moved My Cheese" by Dr. Spencer Johnson. And so anybody who's actually listening to this podcast, you're going to knock it out in about 2.5 hours. But it involves four little characters: Sniff, Scurry, who are mice, and then him and Haw. And all of us at times may fit into one of those roles. If you read this book, it's going to teach you that it, change is paralyzing, right? Change is scary. Changing agencies, changing careers. I mean, hey, selling your house and buying a new house, or moving to a different apartment, or moving to a different state. All of these things can be changed. So what I say is you got to embrace change
Mm.
uh, and acknowledge that it is coming. And the sooner you get comfortable in moving with change, right? So I always give two inferences. Number one, when I tell people is about decision making and empowerment. I want you to feel empowered. I want you to make good decisions. I want you to look at the totality of the circumstances. And I want you to understand that the decision making model is not just a two-lane roadway.
Mm.
But if it is a two-lane roadway, every roadway typically has the sides to it, right? And there's painted lines. If I were to tell you that you can only drive that car in the painted lanes, then I'm forcing you to make decisions in a very linear. But if I tell you I want you to use the shoulders and you can go over that yaw marker, that means you can paint just a little bit outside. But they say, I don't want you in the dirt. I want you to stay on the pavement. But there is, another 2 feet of pavement on the other side of the yaw mark. So it's okay to paint outside the lines. That's where you get people to be comfortable with change and making decisions based on not necessarily real facts. And then for the item that you and I are talking about, if you're driving in the mountains, there are no straightaways. Most of the time, it's curves and a lot of S curves, and so you got to be able to move around the mountain and with the mountain. And
Mm.
that's all we're trying to do. Again, it goes back to that iceberg. It's just standing there, but it will move with enough inertia.
Right.
If you think about a ginormous battleship, um, the rudder is a small piece on the back of the ship that determines the direction that battleship's going to go. And you got to move that thing, but it takes a lot of time for that thing to get turned around to start going in a different direction. Be a rudder. Be a rudder. It's
Yeah,
okay.
I really like that a lot. You know, we were talking a little bit earlier about, this idea that our perspectives and the way that we are based on our past experiences and preconditioning. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood and your life before law enforcement? How did you get here today with that mindset that you have today?
Sure. So, I had a tough life growing up. I was asked by a um, psychiatrist once to describe my childhood in one word, and I said survival.
Mm.
There are people out there who have had worse childhoods than mine, but mine was pretty graphically difficult. Um, I came from a home that had a lot of alcoholism, drug abuse. Um, the person that I call my egg donor, which is my bio mom, had 8 children, and the only two real brothers and sisters in there were me and my twin brother. And I've been in and out of boys' homes, and I've lived every level of abuse you can imagine, from sexual, physical, no food. I've been homeless twice in my life. A very difficult childhood, in and out of orphanages, and product of social services, and in some of those instances, some additional abuse. And when I was 9 years old, I was put into an orphanage in Colorado Springs. It was called the Myron Stratton Home. And my twin brother and I were 9 years old. And I remember the first night they separated us. And this isn't the first time we had been taken out of the house, but first time in this new environment. And my brother was on one half of the dorm, and I was on the other half. And this dorm had 4 pods, and then a big center room. And then across the hall was where some of the older boys were at, and they also had 2 of those. And then the girls would be placed in another building. And so I'm sitting in this tiny little room, and it's got a little bit of a desk and a single bed and a little closet. And then right on the other side is another kid. And there's only one window, and it's, so when you walk in, you're kind of where your bed and your closet is. And then that hallway has got your two little desks. And I can see the light coming in, and it's dark, but, there's enough light that I can make out who's sitting in there. And Susan was the night ward, and it was the first time I'd met her. And she sits down on the bed next to me, and she just looks at me and she says, "Joe, I know you're afraid, but I want you to know you can be anything you choose to be." And she kissed me on my forehead, and she got up and walked out. I can still smell her perfume. I can see her silhouette. And those words have haunted me my entire life. At 9 years of age, that was the moment in my life where I said, I someday will have control of my life. And my life got, I mean, substantially worse. That was probably the best time in my life, was the time in that orphanage. From there on out, it was brutal. But I always kept telling myself, someday I'm going to have control over my life. And from there, I knew that I would be in control of my own decision making. And so, what was the opposite of everything I had grown was police work. I was 9 years old, and I said, I am going to be a police officer because I'm going to help people like me. And then, and I hadn't even been homeless yet, it was just abuse at this point. Um, and then I said to myself, so not only am I going to be a police officer, what's the top? I said, I'm going to be a chief of police. 9 years of age. I said, I'm going to be a police officer, and I'm going to lead a law enforcement agency. True story. And even though things got much more difficult after that, and there were very, very difficult times ahead, I always reminded myself that this too shall come to pass, and I will um, have the opportunity to change the course of my life. And it's funny because, well, let me say this first. Many times people hear about my story, they're like, "You ought to write a book." And I started thinking about that, and I always said that if I did write a book, and I still may when I retire, I thought the title of that book would be "Attitude and Choices," because I do believe that the power of a positive attitude, um, and then this idea of making good choices, um, and knowing someday you will be in control of your choices are really important. Um, and I don't want to title a book saying I survived or whatever. It really is. I want it to be positive, right? I want to tell people that people who are like me or have grown in a scenario like me, that they can overcome that, right? And here's this guy who went on to get a master's degree and go to all these great schools, and he spent 38 years, and now, I'm a successful police chief. But it doesn't come without a cost. Um, you know, a psychiatrist told me that we put trauma into a box, and then we close that lid. But there can be lots of different things that pop that top to come off, and everything will spill out. And I think you and I were discussing this during our phone conversation, that you know sometimes that comes out. My wife came out and she was like, "Oh my God, what's wrong?" Because I'm on the side of the house, sitting by the brick, and I'm just bawling my eyes out. And I looked at her and I said, sometimes this stuff comes out, and this is the way that I process through it. And I need some time to kind of work through it. And later she asked me, um, I've never seen that before. And I said, well, the best way I can explain it to you is I'm Humpty Dumpty that sat on the wall. And even though I fell, and all the king's horses and all the king's men came and put Humpty Dumpty back together again, every one of those scars still exists. And while I do a good job walking this path of life, it doesn't mean that those scars aren't always there. And so at some level, I'll always have some level of broken. But then again, this is where that title of the book comes in. I choose choices. I choose to have a positive attitude about life. I choose to have taken the things that have happened in me, and turn around and make them good. I choose, because I have been homeless and I know what it's like to not have food or a place to stay. to look at them with compassion and empathy. And I think it's because of my childhood and the difficulty I had that I probably am as empathetic and compassionate as I am today, and that I do believe in the essence of humankind. I always say I want, if you're a street sweeper, I want you to sweep the streets like Beethoven composed music or Michelangelo painted, right? As long as you're doing your best, right? My wife is Mexican. Her grandmother and grandfather were beet pickers when they came to this country. And then they got jobs as janitors in a junior high school. And they spent the next 23 to 25 years cleaning the same school every single day. And the great, enormous pride they had in presenting a school for kids, and the joy in which they talked about it many years into their retirement. That's the essence of living. You don't have to be a millionaire. You don't have to be wealthy. You don't have to um, uh, be the CEO of a company or something, right? You can take the things that you do in life and garner a heart full of happiness from that. And that's why I always tell my kids there's the one thing that is priceless is kindness.
Mm.
Offering kindness to another person is priceless. You can't put a dollar on that. So that's a little bit about my story. I mean, we could go on and on and on about it, but yeah, I mean, lots of people have had to overcome. And I just believe that, as an internal optimist, I just knew someday it was going to be better. And so I endured, I survived all of those graphic challenges in my life um, to be where I'm at today.
Wow. You're tugging at my heartstrings. I really appreciate you sharing that. And, we talked a little offline and, I can relate to some of the things, obviously not all of the things, but a couple things really stuck out to me. One, that woman that gave you hope in a time where maybe you didn't have any, if that's not proof that kindness matters, like that was what like really like because she didn't have to do that. She
Mm-mm.
chose to do that. She chose to give a little boy hope and light in a really hard situation. And you clung on to that, knowing that one day you could choose something better for yourself. And it goes back to what we talked about before of controlling the controllable, right? There are so many things in your life that you could not control,
Yeah.
but you can control your attitude, how you show up, your positive mentality, believing in yourself. And a lot of people don't do that. There's choices, like you said, there's choices. And in my life, I didn't make good choices. I let my pain really take me down some dark paths. And, I didn't believe in myself. I didn't think that I could be something better. I really just kind of believed that I would end up like everyone expected me to be anyway, And so I have a lot of respect for you to say, no, I'm gonna push through these hard times and I'm gonna believe in myself and I'm gonna be something better. How do you think, maybe this is a twofold question, but how can you help others to have that same mindset of believing in yourself in the hard times, pushing through the hard times, knowing that you can get to the other end, and having a positive mindset even when things are really hard? Because for me, I believe that it's trainable. But I'm interested to hear your perspective on how other people can adopt that same positive mentality and that mentality of resilience.
Yeah, so when I was going through all of the things that I was going through, and I was put in positions where I was being abused, um, I had a belief, and that's the word that I use most of the time, is that I just had a belief that I would survive, that I would pull through. Um, it sounds corny because I don't have an aha moment for you, right? To say this is it.
Mm.
What I will say is that inside of every human being is a power that, if harnessed, can help you do the most incredible things in the world. Um, and I would say, and particularly to people who have been in similar situations to me, and then throughout your career, because there's going to be ups and downs, and I don't want to give away my one um, piece of advice that I want to share at the end, but that if you have a belief in yourself, if you have courage, right? Um, Courage means lots of things, right? We can talk about, it's one of our values in our department, and it does mean courage in the face of adversity and danger. But it also means courage to do the right thing for the right reasons, right? Even when people aren't looking. But it also means that internally you have the courage to overcome,
Mm.
to face that adversity. And my belief system when I was going through all of it was that I was going to overcome this, that I would not succumb to whatever was happening to me, that I was going to find that safe place in my heart, in my mind, in my soul, that I'm of value and I have value, um, and that I will overcome what I am facing today, to be strong, to be courageous through this difficult time. And so for me, it's just always been about belief. It's always been about courage. It's always been about that internal struggle that all of us go through. And I have been able to train myself that I can be angry and I can be frustrated and I can go outside and scream at the top of my lungs, right? That I can feel like a failure. And then I will stop and I will put my hands together and I'll take that deep breath and then I'll get refocused and then I will just say, but I will overcome, I will survive. And I believe that the path that I am on will help me one day provide something to somebody somehow. It only takes one,
Yeah.
just like Susan, it only takes one, that you make an impact in somebody's career, that you say something of value to somebody, that one hand up instead of a push down in somebody's life can make the difference. But you do have to find that inside yourself, right? And so again, it comes back down to the attitude and choice thing. I believe that when people say, I've been backed into a corner and I'm giving up, I'm tired, that is a mentality that you got to break away from. You got to break that chain because that's what's going to suck you down.
Yeah.
You have to find that inner light inside your own heart, inside your own soul, and recognize that you do have that value. And no matter what's going on, once you get to a position where you can make a better choice, once you get into the position where you can choose a different path, where you can see the light at the end of the corner, you want to talk about positivity. When you're in the face of adversity, if you can find that space in you to say, this too shall come to pass, and I will overcome it, and I'm going to be better tomorrow for it. Now there's the power. There's the power. There's no tool. It's got to come from in here.
Yeah. Wow, I love that. I think too, as you're talking, there's a few things that came to mind and this idea of overcoming something. I think that we also have to remember that we don't have to do that alone. You can have the belief that you can overcome it and you should have that belief in yourself, but also understand that you might need other people to help you. You might need other resources. You talked a few times about therapy and, some things that have helped you to overcome some of those things. And so, to your point of kind of that lid, you know, how can you? I have this conversation all the time, and I never know if I really like verbalize it in the way that I conceptualize it in my head. But when we talk about courage and strength and resiliency and overcoming things, I think that we've convinced ourselves in some way that not dealing with it, avoiding it, numbing, escaping from it is the courage and the strength that's required to keep going. And really, the opposite is true. Like us going through it, that's the way to overcome it. I always say the only way out is through, and that's the hardest thing, right? It's like we gotta
Yep.
we got to go through the storm in order to get to the other side of it. And so, my hope is through these conversations, we can start to have a different understanding of what that looks like, having that intrinsic belief in yourself and motivation in yourself to be able to have a positive mindset, to be able to believe in yourself, knowing that you have the ability to overcome these things, but also understanding that the only way to overcome these things is to go through it. And so I think it's really interesting.
Well, what you're talking about is masking, right? You got to take that mask off because no matter what you do, you can put the mask up, but it's only gonna hide what's really going on for a short period of time.
Yeah.
And the reality is that you do got to use resources, right? I mean, even when all that stuff was happening before I could become a cop, I went through 2 years of intensive psychotherapy, to get to a point because all I wanted to do was be a police officer, and I knew I needed to take care of that stuff. If you don't take care of it, if you don't address it, it will continue to resurface. Even me, who has gone through it, I just had an appointment on Friday with Dr. Brower, who's the psychologist that I use now, specializing in law enforcement. There's no shame in saying that you are using help. In our department, we've broken down the barrier, right? I pay 100% for all psychological services for the entire family, kids, wives, everybody. I don't know who's going. I just pay the bill. And it's a lot of money. For a small department, it is a ton of money. Um, but I pay for it all. I don't use EAP because I want people to be good. I use it. My wife's used it. My kids have used it. We've used it as a family. Lots of people here use it. It's okay. There's no shame. If you're masking, right, and you're showing courage because you've tucked this away and you're overcoming, it's still there and you haven't really overcome it yet.
Yeah.
It is only through help. And so that's why we have this incredibly strong chaplaincy program that is like deeply ingrained into our law enforcement organization. And our chaplains are known and they're in the car all the time and they are calling. I just spoke to him this morning. He just called me to see how I was doing, just to check in on me. How are you doing, Joe? And he's like a brother to me now. And we meet once a month, and his job is to take care of my flock, and he does it at the highest level. And Kevin Shive and Libby, our other two chaplains, and everybody talks to him. And now they're marrying people in our department, and they do marriage counseling camps for our folks, and they are trusted. And then talking to a psychologist, those are two resources that will help you no longer have to put a mask on to say I put these things away, but to have a real brave face on that said I faced it.
Hmm.
I faced it and I overcame. It didn't get the best of me. It That does not make me who I am today. It is something that helped carve a path of the life of which I've had to walk, which by embracing that has taught me life lessons that I can use to not only get through my life successfully, but to maybe pave a path for somebody else to help avoid some of those pitfalls.
And that's exactly what I was thinking as you were talking. And I truly believe this, that our hardest times in our life, our biggest adversities are our biggest opportunity to learn to grow and to help others. And while you never want people to have to go through what you went through, I say this all the time in my life. I'm in some ways, and it sounds so weird. And, I'm in some ways grateful for the things that I had been through because I do not think that I
Yeah.
would have the same passion for what I do or the same empathy for what I do if I hadn't have gone through those things. And again, of course, like you don't wish that on anybody, but I think that if we can have that mentality of like, hey, our hardest times are our biggest opportunities for growth and to impact other people's lives. And so now, obviously we've had conversations about the things that you're doing organizationally and how passionate you are about helping other people. And I know you mentioned a few of those things just now. I'd love to talk more about the organizational wellness piece of it. I know you said chaplaincy is something that has been really instrumental. And when we talk about wellness, a lot of times we hear about like ROI, like what is the ROI of these things? For anyone who's listening who doesn't know what that is, it's return on investment, right? What's the return on investment? You talk about all the money and all the things, but what I heard in what you said is the ROI is the people. Like that's the ROI, is that the people are good. You've built a culture of trust, a culture where people are reaching for these resources, they're benefiting from these resources, they're improving their life because of these resources. And so anything else that you can share about, some of the successes that you guys have had. I also know that you have a really interesting compressed work week that you've focused on. Anything that you can share with our listeners, that would be helpful.
Yeah. So first, I guess as the leader of my organization, I have to do a lot of public speaking, and at every opportunity that I get to engage in the community, um, and you're aware we lost a police officer on November um, in November of 24, and it was a very difficult time. And even during his eulogy, when I was doing um, my prepared remarks, I reminded everybody there's 3,000 cops sitting in the audience at that church, and all of the people that I've spoken to throughout the city of Golden. I always start off with by saying that my number one priority is to my people first. And therefore, our number one priority in the Golden Police Department is to take care of its people. Our number two priority is public safety. And I say that, and sometimes, you'll get an eye that gets raised, and I'm like, listen, there's a reason for this. This job is very, very difficult. None of us get through a career in law enforcement. And when I remind them, I say, listen, the research indicates that most human beings will go through 3 to 6 traumatic events in their lifetime. 3 to 6 in a lifetime. A police officer will go through 400 to 600 in a career. And then you let that settle in, people are like, whoa. I might think about it. A traumatic event, a death in the family, a divorce, whatever. You will go through 3 to 6 of those in your entire lifetime. And in the average career, a police officer will have gone through 4 to 600 of those. By average, that is 3 to 6 a month.
Wow.
And you'll go through 3 to 6 in a lifetime. And when we think about that, for all those years, I went through all kinds of calls for service and stuff that were very difficult. And when I first started on the career, you get patted on the back and say, see you tomorrow, kid. Right. Um, we don't do what we do now when you're involved in traumatic events. We get them off duty. We get them involved with psychological services and the chaplains, and we give them time to recover. And all of the things that we do now is very different from when I first started. All positive. But for me, I always say, I'm going to focus on my people first, which means it is incumbent upon me to get them the best pay I can, the best equipment and I can, and all of that stuff. And I'm very dedicated to that. But that doesn't mean as much as giving them my time, listening and understanding their plight, um, recognizing it's not about me, it's about them, and that I am here for them. That is my call. My call is to be here for them. And as a result, everything that I do is, it doesn't matter if it's a disciplinary case. I always err on the side of the employee. And I go through everything I can to value the employee so that I can use every tool to properly mitigate as long as it's appropriate. Sometimes I've had to fire people. Sometimes you have to fire people. But it does mean that we go above and beyond to care for our people, whether it's modified duty. Somebody gets injured, even if they're off duty, I'm going to give them 6 months of modified duty. And sometimes I extend it to 9 months, right? So that they're not using up all of their leave. It's those little things, and there's so many of them for us to try to discuss through this. But I will say that the compressed work week actually was our city manager's idea, Scott Fargo. And he came in and he said, we're going to go to this compressed work week. And I'm like, what are you talking about, compressed work week? And he said, well, the expectation is 40, but our goal is going to be to work 32 hours, no change in pay. We're going to try to do 8-hour days, 4 days a week. and give more time back to people. And I'm like, oh my, I got to be part of this. Well, fortunately, the police department was the one that was picked out of our city to do the pilot because we have a little bit of everything. Um, and so we did it for, I don't know, about a year and a half before the rest of the city started. And we're the first ones in the United States to do this. And it doesn't work perfectly all the time because, the goal is that we expect you to do 40. If we need you to do 40, you got to do 40. But every day that we can get you out 2 hours early, we're going to get you out 2 hours early. And those 2 hours are for you to go focus on the things that make you better, the things that bring you joy in life, the things like doing things with your kids or going to work out at a gym or going for a hike or whatever it is, whatever it does to make you recharge your battery. And basically, we're giving you a full day back.
Mm.
And so now those Zennials, now people that apply, I'm getting ready to hire a guy out of Missouri. First thing out of his mouth is, "You're still doing that compressed work week, aren't you?" Yeah, of course we are. And
Yeah,
so, is it a great recruitment tool? Yeah, is it? But at the end of the day, it's all focused on one thing. What can we do to take care of our people?
yeah. Wow, I love that. And I was going to say, because I don't think you told me that you were the first in the United States to do that, but I remember talking to you and being like, that's really, really unique. And I think that time off is a huge topic right now, especially in the context of wellness.
Mhm.
So I appreciate you sharing that. I know we're running a little bit over on time. I feel like I could talk to you for 3 hours, so we might have to do like a round two at some point. But my final question for you, and then I'll kind of let you take the floor if I missed anything. But what words of wisdom would you share with someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
So, it's funny. I'd already written this down right after our last conversation, and we've already been talking about it. So it really fits into the day's, I think, podcast. But I've written it down. And I'm just going to read it out loud. For me, it's about embracing failure because it is going to occur in your life and in your career. And for me, it's the real challenge is how you react to that, how you react to failure. Um, for me, it's about allowing that to become a lesson and not something that holds you down. And I want each and every person to embrace the fact that you will fail, go home, let it be a lesson, and be better the next day. You come in the next day and be a better version of you. And I think you will succeed. Um, and along with that is to remind people that, when you start a career, I didn't know if I was going to make it 40 years or 40 plus years in my career. But I do know this that I looked at everything in my career as a destination. I got to get to this, and then I got to get to this, and then I got to get to this, and I got to get to this, and I got to get to this because I'm going to be a chief of police. So I got to get to every step that's going to help me become a chief of police. And I would remind people that while you're going through this career, embracing failure is going to be important. Um, you're going to test for a supervisory job and not get it. You're going to test for an investigator's position and you're not going to get it. Don't give up. Get better, right? Be a better version of you. And then as that occurs, your career is not a destination, it's a journey. So do the one thing that I didn't do, and that is truly enjoy the ride because I never sat back and enjoyed the moments in my career that were special. I never looked at that and say, wow, I really accomplished something this time, and just sat back and gave myself that moment to be happy about it. I was immediately into active. I'm an activator, so I was immediately into activation mode. Now, how am I going to master this? I want you to enjoy every aspect of it, and don't jump through it so fast that you forget all of the things that could really make you the happiest, whether it's working in an undercover capacity or being that motor cop or being on the SWAT team. Take your time and eat all of that up because once you get into leadership, that road is hard. And the higher you go, the harder that road is. And you have to become committed to it. Um, and I think that's good. And I do hope that we can maybe do another one of these because I have a lot of leadership um, thoughts, things that I've shared with people throughout my career, things that I thought that aren't your normal, you know, tagline adventures, but they're things that I feel are important. I'm in the middle of writing a first line leadership book right now. Um, and it's designed from my 40-year perspective to those wanting to become first line supervisors and those that are first line supervisors to say, if you can focus on these things, um, it's really going to, I think, help you become a stronger leader. But if we don't, I think
Mhm.
today's session was fabulous, and I was happy to be vulnerable a little bit. And I hope that your listeners see that even in a brave job like law enforcement, it is okay to be vulnerable, it is okay to be real, and it's okay to admit when we hurt.
Um, Thank you. I agree. I've loved this conversation, and I think we can absolutely do a leadership round two. So everyone who's listening, stay tuned for that. We'll make sure we make that happen. The one thing that you said that I just wanted to reiterate that I thought was so powerful was don't give up, get better. That was great. Thank you. Chief Harvey, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Paige. Appreciate you. Have a great day.
You too.